Welcome, everybody. You're going to love the story of Dr. Schierson. From fixing cross eyes and pug noses, bloodless operations, questionable techniques, at least 2 prison terms, Dr. Schierson hired a publicity agent and soon became a well-respected, in some circles, miracle worker in restoring beauty to some famous women, or any woman who had enough money. In some circles, he was known as Dr. Quack, but obviously not everyone read the newspapers in those days. In 1912, a man named John Zeppo sued Dr. Schierson. Zeppo, in his suit, alleges that last July he consulted Dr. Schierson regarding a pain which he, Zeppo, had in his side. He declares that after an examination, he was told that he was in serious condition and likely to die unless he took a certain treatment which only the defendant was able to give him. His bill was $60. The ailment, he says, was of a trifling nature and the treatment not beneficial. In June 1915, this article shows up. $300 a bottle for water. Schierson, medical faker, gets 6 months. Henry J. Schierson, who has done time in the Maryland Penitentiary, pleaded guilty yesterday to swindling people by selling them fake medicines and giving them fake medical advice, and was sentenced to 6 months in the penitentiary. This article was in the Washington Post, April 23, 1915. $60 to cure cancer. The first to tell her story was a Polish woman who went to the office of Dr. Schierson yesterday and was there examined by a Dr. G.C. Brown. She said that he told her she was suffering from cancer, but he could cure her for $60. The second witness was an Italian woman who took her daughter, 18 years old, to the office of Dr. Schierson on February. The girl was nervous, and after a brief examination with an x-ray, the woman was told that her daughter was suffering from bad blood and that a nerve at the back of the neck was causing the trouble. She could be cured in 4 months for $150. She objected to the price, and they compromised on $125. Next, borrows for cure. The third case was that of a man out of employment and in poor health, who was told after an examination with an electrical machine that he was suffering from kidney trouble and could be cured in 3 months for $60. He borrowed $25 to pay on April 10 and was to pay $25 on May 5, and the other $10 when cured. Men at his institute were using his license to practice medicine. Of course, they had different names, but they were using his license. Dr. Schierson finally hires himself a publicity agent. The agent was connected in theatrical circles, so the good doctor was introduced to celebrities. His first wealthy patient was none other than Fanny Brice. The length the woman of today is willing to go to pay the high price of beauty can be measured by the neat black and white check Miss Fanny Brice, of musical comedy fame, just sent through the mail to a famous Chicago plastic surgeon. The check was made out for $5,000, and in exchange, Miss Brice received one brand new, more or less, Grecian nose. The kind, in short, for which she had always yearned. $5,000. And that did not include the $55 a day Miss Brice and her little family paid for rooms at a beachfront hotel in Atlantic City during the brief indisposition caused by the operation. The $5,000 that Fanny Brice paid for her new nose is worth about $87,000 in 2022. So she paid a lot of money for that new nose. Obviously, Fanny was happy with her nose, and she philosophized about modern beauty. This last photo of her is in 1929, 7 years later. She still looks good. In that same year, 1923, articles came out about Eva Tangway, about her plastic surgery. But first, I'll show you a few pictures of her when she began her career, and she was very young. Eva Tangway, the very well-known comedian, used to sing a song called I Don't Care. The burden of it was that Eva didn't care for anything, not at all. But one day Eva looked into the mirror and decided that she did not care about something, her looks. Her face had grown fat. There were bags under her eyes. She counted 11 wrinkles in her forehead. She had a double chin and a third one, well, in process of formation. "I'm 40, said Eva to herself, but I look 50. Here's where I began to cheat time and take those marks of his off my face. 5 years have passed since then, and now Eva Tangway looks no more than 20. And she's not going to stop there. I can peel off 3 years more and look as I did when I was 17, she says." Well, I think she's kidding herself. "And that is just what I'm going to do. When I get back the same face I had when I was 17, I'm going to stop. I'm going to keep that face. And I know how to do it." Eva Tangway had 16 operations in 5 years, and like an onion, the layers of time were stripped from her until her 45-year-old face became 20. But she wants 3 years more off still. Of course, she had a lot of different doctors, I would say, but Dr. Schierson was one of them. He does take credit for working on Eva. Our next celebrity is Truly Shattuck. She was very famous in her day. This article says how they cut 64 pounds of fat off Truly Shattuck. The unusual operation that trimmed down the musical comedy star's waist from 54 to 32 inches and carved away the ugly layers that hid her once widely admired figure. In the pictures, we see Dr. Schierson's operating room. It shows him making over a woman. Under that is a picture of Dr. Schierson. Next to him is Truly Shattuck as she looked just before the operation. And on the right is Truly Shattuck in a costume of 25 years of age, displaying the formal figure which she has now regained. This is from Chicago Central Press. New figures for old, new figures for old. That is what modern surgery offers now. Dr. Henry J. Schierson of West End Hospital is reducing women quickly and surely with a surgical knife. Until now, his work has been done without the accompanying blare of trumpets. But now he is in the public eye as a result of the operation he performed on Truly Shattuck, stage star of yesterday, in which he carved 67 pounds of fat off of her figure. Her waist of 52 inches is now 34, and she weighs 132 pounds. She is feeling fit and is going back on the stage. Truly, now 56, was at one time said to be one of the most perfectly formed women in America. According to Dr. Schierson, this huge operation only lasted 45 minutes, and there beside the operating table lay 64 pounds of adipose tissue. And what he claims, there was hardly any loss of blood at all, less than an ounce. I find this very hard to believe. You'll enjoy our next two women that got operated on by Dr. Schierson. It's a mother-daughter team, and they're aristocrats from England. Dr. Schierson's story of the affair is as follows. Lady Diana Manners, while playing in Chicago, met several of his patients who were outstanding examples of what plastic surgery can accomplish. Among those whom he had operated on have been Fanny Brice, whose nose he straightened, Truly Shattuck, a famous stage beauty, off whom he carved 64 pounds, and Pearl Gardner, a Chicago society girl, who had 20 pounds of fat removed. Dr. Schierson states that Lady Diana, therefore, called one day at his elaborate offices in the State Lake Building and said, "I am beautiful enough for any human part, but to play the Madonna in The Miracle, I must be ethereal. What can you do for me through the science of plastic surgery?" According to Dr. Schierson, he outlined the operation that might be performed, and Lady Diana immediately made all arrangements for it. The part of the Madonna in The Miracle is played by two women who alternate every third day because of the tremendous emotional strain of the part. Therefore, Dr. Schierson proposed to take advantage of those 3 days absent from the stage to perform the operation and permit the preliminary healing. According to Dr. Schierson, the operation shortly afterwards took place. With his knife, he gave Lady Diana's face a 5-angle lift. He made the Madonna eyes larger and smoothed out the natural laughing lines from her expression so that it might more justly portray the serious role which she played on the stage. At the time, he states, she was eminently satisfied with the results. In fact, he says that she told him his operating technique was as great a miracle as the one in the great play. The Duchess of Rutland, mother of Lady Diana, was so pleased with his handiwork on her daughter's face, according to Dr. Schierson, that she became his next patient. The Duchess had a complete facial lift, states Dr. Schierson, and she does not deny that she was one of his patients. She also had quite the latest thing in plastic surgery, eye rejuvenation, which removes the wrinkles from around the eyes. If I do say so myself, they were good jobs, both of them. The Duchess especially looks years younger. Then came the matter of the bills for the operations. Lady Diana's denial that she had one, and the suits that Dr. Schierson is bringing. He states, well, they came to my office about their bills. Lady Diana's bill is for $1,000, the Duchess for $1,500. I guess they forgot they were in America. They began talking right away about deferring payment. Lady Diana assured me they were very, very, very much pleased with the work, and she would recommend me to her very good friend, the Queen of Romania, and goodness knows what other royalty and nobility by way of good measure. I said that was very nice of her, and suggested that a check for $2,500 would be perfectly all right. She mentioned some more names and titles and things. My reputation would be made. I would be hobnobbing with royalty. And well, what was $2,500 between friends? However, Dr. Schierson decided that cold cash means more than coronets, and a check in the hand is worth 2 promised introductions even to the Queen of Romania. He therefore called on the courts to do a little financial surgery, and summons were served on both Lady Diana and the Duchess of Rutland just before they left for Chicago. Lady Diana, when asked about the little matter of Dr. Schierson's bill, allowed her face to be examined and then said, "Am I any different? Are there any scars or anything to show that I have had a facial operation?" She then gave a formal statement denying that she had had any connection with the beauty surgeon of Chicago. Friends of Lady Diana, while they also deny the surgical uplift, suggest that she may have gone through the plaster process and so have given rise to the present story. This consists in lifting creases from around the eyes by heavy court plaster, pulling the skin up to the temples. They also give a slightly different account of Lady Diana's last visit to Dr. Schierson's office. According to them, while waiting for the doctor in his reception room, she examined a photograph album and among the pictures found one of herself autographed with her name and extolling Dr. Schierson for his good work with the knife. According to her friends, Lady Diana was insulted and left without saying goodbye. On the other hand, Dr. Schierson claims that the marks of Lady Diana's operation will be found hidden under the edge of her hair. As he describes a typical face-lifting operation, it consists of a slight cut on each side of the temple. This is then stitched up, the skin of the face being drawn smooth and taut, removing the slack tissue around the chin and mouth. And he goes on to talk about the operations. Well, they tried to skip town without paying him, so now he's suing them. The Duchess didn't deny the plastic surgery. And a month later, Lady Diana's facial debt was canceled. She sent a check to the surgeon, who claims work made her look like a girl of 19. Dr. Schierson was so famous he was always in the papers. In 1926, he had an article entitled, "Be a Milk Tippler," says Dr. Schierson. Peaches and cream complexions of American women have their foundation in a milk diet. Dr. Schierson has won fame by beautifying motion picture, musical comedy, and vaudeville stars and many society women of America. He has one infallible prescription for the attainment of beauty. It is 1 quart of milk a day, 1 hour of sunshine, and repeat ad libitum. This article was from back in 1924. Music eases pain of eye operation. Well, Jan Rubini coaxed murmuring music from a violin. Mrs. Irene Beazle, formerly an actress, underwent a minor operation upon one eye with no anesthetic. The theory of Dr. Henry Schierson was that music may so enrapture the senses that they may be made insensible to a surgeon's scalpel. Rubini played softly while the surgeon worked. "Do you feel pain?" asked Dr. Schierson. "None whatever," the patient replied. "The music is wonderful." The actress hopes now to return to the stage, which she was compelled to leave by a growth on her eye. This next article is from February 1925. It's a good one. Eye defects cause crime. Chicago surgeon blames unbalanced vision. Declare eye strain and cross eyes responsible for delinquent and criminal cases. On the theory that much of the crime in the United States is caused by eye strain and cross eyes, Dr. Henry Schierson, Chicago surgeon, today wrote Governor Small for permission to make a survey of Illinois penal institutions with a view to determining the part unbalanced eyes play in crime. "I want to determine the relationship between crime and defective vision," he said. "There are 6 million cross-eye sufferers in this country, many of them with potential criminal instincts provoked by undue eye strain and nervous disorganization. In 14 autopsies performed on criminals, not one exception was found to the unequal development of the eye muscles, according to Dr. Schierson." His letter follows in part. "Research discloses that the delinquent and criminal classes are victims of eye strain due to muscle imbalance and, most of all, to a greater or lesser degree of cross eyes, some so slight that only an expert can disclose it. I am convinced that the mass of crime is the aftermath and consequence of cross-eye afflictions, either manifest or bearing pathological tendency to cross eyes. One of the reasons for defective vision in this country is the abundance of skyscrapers cutting off the long rays of light," he said. "In Europe, there is no such condition, and the eyes of Europeans, therefore, are much stronger. All sorts of maladies can be traced to imbalance of the eyes," Dr. Schierson wrote. At the conclusion of the investigation, Dr. Schierson said he expected to establish eye clinics, and he's going to fix everybody's eyes, so that's worth tons of money. Now enters the most talked about girl in the world, Peaches Browning. As a matter of fact, I discovered Dr. Schierson when doing research for my story, Daddy's Cinderellas. Peaches Browning went to Dr. Schierson to have him remove some acid scars and reduce and reshape her heavy legs. He claimed to melt the fat away. Peaches got her new legs by having the fat that made them so big and heavy melted out of them. Melted out is exactly the description given by herself and by Dr. Schierson. It might even be said that the fat was tried out, because it was rendered liquescent by the application of heat, and was then drained by means of tubes set into small incisions near the ankles. But everyone knows that it takes considerable heat to melt animal fat, and how everyone will ask, was it possible to melt the fat inside Peach's legs? just as though it was inside a casserole dish, and not burn her skin or destroy the muscles and blood vessels and nerves of the legs. It was done by diathermic current. The full-page article goes on to talk about the operation. He says, I evolved the technique especially for Mrs. Browning. I think I shall call it hereafter the Diana operation, for Diana, the virgin goddess of the chase, was famous for her slim, straight legs. Mrs. Browning needed no alterations above the knee. Her thighs were well shaped and were not too fat. All of my work, therefore, had to be done below the knees. So he basically melted the fat off. Well, here we get into some cutting. First of all, I made 2 incisions through the skin at points covering the vertical area of the ankle and over the tendon. Through these incisions, I removed the layers of fat that made her ankles look like rolling pins. Then I reached my knife through the upper incision and sliced the fat around the upper part of the calf. I diced it up thoroughly, taking care, of course, not to cut through the skin, loosening it up and shredding it in all directions. I made a regular hash of it. What was left was a scrambled mass of fat cells without life or adhesion. After that, I inserted a soft rubber tube, a surgical drain, in the lower part of the scrambled fat, and brought the end out through the lower incision. Then I wrapped an electrical pad, so-called, around the leg and applied through it a diathermic current of from 750 to 1000 milliamperes. Peaches was obviously happy and satisfied with her operations. I never heard anything about her suing him. So now we're going on to the next person. Sadie Holland was a stenographer, and she went to visit Dr. Schierson. This article was in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, March 1928. In Chicago, Sadie Holland, 30-year-old stenographer, thought she had physical defects that marred her beauty. She had a scar on one shoulder, the result of a burn in her childhood, and her legs were not exactly straight. They were just a trifle bowed. She could not wear evening clothes because of the scar, and she could not wear short skirts without some degree of self-consciousness, because they revealed the lack of alignment in her legs, or at least she felt that they did. So Sadie saved her money and went to a famous beauty doctor. She had $800, so the doctor told her the scar could be removed and the legs straightened. Thereupon, she forked over her life savings and submitted to both operations at once. The scar was removed all right, and so were both of Sadie's legs a few days later. For several days, she hovered between life and death as a result of gangrene infection, and blood transfusions were necessary to save her life. She is expected to live now, but instead of having straightened legs, or even crooked ones, she must now go through life with none at all. Such was the price of Sadie's vanity. The young woman was taken to the Chicago Osteopathic Hospital, and there both operations were performed. Dr. Schierson removed the shoulder blemish, and Dr. Zaff, chief surgeon at the hospital, sawed through the tibia bone of each leg, with Dr. Schierson assisting and supervising the work. After the tibia bone of each leg was sawed through, the legs were placed in a plaster cast. But within a few days, the pain became so severe that the casts were removed. A brother of the girl became alarmed and called other surgeons. X-ray examinations were made, and it was found that gangrene had developed in both legs. Desperately ill, with fever raging, Miss Holland was hurried away to another hospital, and as the gangrene was rapidly spreading, both legs were amputated just above the knee, in a last resort effort to save her life. For several days it was believed she would die anyway, but the new surgeons were able to keep her alive through blood transfusions. When she recovered consciousness and learned her legs had been removed, she begged to be allowed to die. Nevertheless, she will live. Immediately, the charges and replies began to fly between the second set of surgeons and the first. Dr. Paul Magnuson, who attended the young woman after her removal from the osteopathic hospital, made a report to the American Medical Society, in which he set forth several startling contentions. One of these in particular was that the operation was futile from the start. X-ray pictures of Miss Holland's legs and body, the report says, show that the operation on the tibia bones would not have affected the line of the leg, since there are 2 bones in each leg and only one was sawed through. The other would have acted as a splint, and after healing, the leg would have remained exactly the same as before the operation. Besides, Miss Holland's leg bones were perfectly straight, and the bowed condition was due to the width of her hips and to the knee joints. The rest of the article goes on to bash Dr. Schierson, talk about all the suits against him, and all the allegations regarding the life and career of a surgeon, connecting him with various quack institutions and branding him an ex-convict and fraud, arrested several times in other states for practicing medicine without a license. And it goes on and on about Dr. Schierson being a quack. The accusations were flying. Dr. Schierson began to blame Dr. Zaff. He claimed he did not operate on Sadie's legs. In the summer of 1929, he did settle a $200,000 suit against him and promised to pay Sadie $40,000. The case was not closed, though. In December 1929, Dr. Zaff testified about what happened during the operation. It is as follows. It's entitled, Dispute Schierson's Claim. Much of the testimony yesterday was introduced by the state to show that the statement of Dr. Schierson's attorneys that they would prove he had no connection with Miss Holland's case and that she was the patient of Dr. Zaff was false. Dr. Floyd Peckman, superintendent of the osteopath hospital in which the operation was performed, appeared with the records of the institution, which showed that Miss Holland was admitted as recommended by Dr. Schierson and that she was examined by Dr. Schierson. Dr. Zaff was then called and testified that he never saw Miss Holland until she was on the operating table, already under anesthetic. The surgeon testified that Schierson had blundered during the operation and against his sharp reprimands had persisted in placing his gloved hand into the wounds instead of using instruments. In bone surgery, the strictest care against infection must be followed, and Schierson repeatedly disregarded the admonitions of Dr. Zaff, the latter testified. The testimony of Dr. Zaff, questioned by Assistant Attorney General William Clausen, was in part as follows. Who beside yourself was present at the operation? Dr. Schierson, Dr. Brown, who gave the anesthetic, 2 interns, and nurses. Prior to that time, you had never seen Miss Holland? No. Describe the operation and what was said. Answer. Dr. Schierson indicated the place to operate. I made a 2-inch incision. The wound was retracted by Dr. Schierson, who also sponged the wound and disposed of some bleeders. We used an electric saw to cut partway through the bone, and later we broke the bone through. The purpose of the operation, which is common, is to correct the curvature by breaking the bone in the center, straightening out the leg, and allowing it to heal in a straightened position. Did you say anything to Dr. Schierson? I objected several times to Dr. Schierson putting his hand in the wound. What did he say? Not much. There was nothing I could do, because it was his case. The wounds in both legs were dressed and casts put on. That night the patient complained of pain, and the cast was eased. The pain continued. Dr. Zaff testified. So he directed the nurses to communicate with Dr. Schierson. When they failed to find him, Dr. Zaff himself ordered the casts removed. Schierson, after seeing the change in Miss Holland's condition, suddenly had to go to New York and insisted that Dr. Zaff take full charge. Did you later talk on the telephone to Dr. Schierson in New York? Yes, I told him that the family had removed Miss Holland to another hospital and that complaints had been made. Dr. Schierson said, Zaff, stick with me. Help me out in this case, and I'll make you famous. That shows you the personality of Dr. Schierson. Dr. Schierson goes on to work in the profession. He continues to sue others and be sued for malpractice. He wrote a book entitled As Others See You. It's a weight loss book. He spoke at women's clubs. He continued to have many patients. He did another stint or two in prison in 1944. He was quoted as once describing himself as the king of quacks, while under oath before a medical board. His medical career can be summed up by saying, he has quacked his way through a dozen states, collecting a fortune from patients. He thumbed his nose at law enforcement and organized medicine. He has mutilated and defrauded his patients and got away with it. One positive distinction, however, Dr. Schierson proved that several states had inadequate codes to control quacks and protect their victims. His 40 years of practice continued until his death in 1949 at age 68. His career was interrupted by brief vacations in penitentiaries. He continued to practice on the wealthy and continued to leave a trail of corruption and pain. He was successful with his sketchy high school education and a set of phony credentials, and last but not least, an overabundance of unmitigated gall. I hope you enjoyed the story of Dr. Schierson, the king of quacks. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.